Okay, let's see if this is working. So we want to monitor operating system load averages, right? Getting started with some very basic monitoring. So I'm going to have a dev server and a production server, but that could represent dozens or hundreds of servers if you wanted. And we are going to maintain our infrastructure using we could use a lot of different tools, but we're going to use ArcShell for some of this, and we're going to assume we don't have access to things like Splunk and Datadog and all of those kind of cool things, but we have access to shell script. So we want to deploy just basic load average monitoring. And what we don't want to do is get up in the middle of the night because the load spikes to 15 or 20 or 25 once. Those are great things to know about in the future, and we're going to talk about how we can do that. But we do want some decent monitoring. So we're going to include a script that runs, I think it's every minute, by default with ArcShell. When you install ArcShell, this is going to run by default. And what we want to do is show you how we can write one script with all these cool variables that you can override in your dev environment, in your prod environment, wherever you want, in a variety of ways, in a variety of config files. It's really up to you how you want to build your system out. But what we do is we're going to show you how we provide the defaults and how we provide variables that have default values, so that if you happen to define another value, we'll use that. If not, we're going to use our own value. So I don't have to go and put these variables in another file for you. We write the file once, and then if you want to, you can override these values. Now, I guess at the top here we have some documentation, and we should expose these variables so that you can see in the documentation that they're available to you, but we'll think about that later. So what we have first is a __ usage function, and ArcShell knows how to parse that and kind of make some documentation for this script. And so that we just got minimal documentation here, monitoring operating system load averages. And we are going to load in ArcShell. This is how you make sure that you load in ArcShell fresh. We set archhome equal to 0. If you don't like that syntax, you can use archhome. That works too. And we're going to source in the .arcshell file. This is created every time you run setup. It's recreated, and this sources in the toolkit. If only does it once, and then it sets archhome, and after that case, it won't. This won't do anything. So if you make any changes to the code or anything like that, and you want to reload your current shell, you need to set archhome equal to 0 and reload it. Now we assume that ArcShell could be installed on more than one user on a server, and you don't need all of these users monitoring the load average usually. So if that's the case, if you have it in other user accounts for automation reasons, but you don't want to monitor the load average, by default, this is only going to monitor load averages on the primary install. And so we have a library here called boot is, and usually the first word gives you a clue to where that's at, and it's in the boot library, which are things that are required when we do an install, basically. So as opposed to taking some functions and putting them into the main core libraries, if they're already in boot, we leave them there and we just use them. So boot is primary ArcShell instance, so if not, exit 0. So it just exits if it's not the primary. And there's a way you can designate your ArcShell instance as the primary or auxiliary when you're doing the setup install. If you want to disable this entirely, you just anywhere in your config files, just set disable server load alerting to true or a truthy value, which means you can use a cron expression because we're using is truthy. That's built into ArcShell. And so you can make this a cron expression, and you can disable our load alerting during some period when you know it's going to get triggered regularly and you just kind of want a window. Blackout window, or if you just don't care about it on weekends. We have a lot of flexibility here. One of the things with prod and dev is there are times when your dev instances are critical. I would say dev instances are critical on Monday mornings at about 7 a.m. You really need to know what's going on with them at that time, because that's when everybody's going to come in from the weekend and want to know, they're going to get angry that things aren't running. So, you make your dev instances critical for an hour. And on Monday morning, expect to maybe get out of bed a little early and get right to work getting dev back up before people get in. So you want some control over the time periods in which you can do these things. Okay, so we're going to get our OS load. We're going to return the load, and we're going to do that as a whole number. Now, what I love about Sublime and doing development even in Bash here, you can right-click, go to definition, and boom, it opens up the ArcShell OS file, and there's our OS return load, and we can see that -w returns a whole number. Why do we want to do that? Because Bash totally fails on evaluations if it's not a whole number. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that returns as a whole number. And we've got two sections here. We've got the critical OS load and abnormal. So critical is going to be, a high spike. So we're going to set that by default to 15, but again, you can override it in any of the config files within ArcShell, and we're going to set a time period of 10 minutes. So we're basically saying if the critical load is over this value for 10 minutes, then we're going to open a critical alert. And, truth be known, we could add another value here and control what type of alert is opened for a critical load. I might add that. So we would just turn that into a variable. So doing this kind of thing is really, really handy. This is not easy to do if you were to write this from scratch. So what are we doing? We're saying, we're evaluating, okay, if timer minutes true for, and then we have this expression here. We're going to evaluate this. Does this return true if OS load is greater than critical OS load? So that will be evaluated when we call this, and it will set a timer if it's true. And if it's not true, that timer will get deleted and reset. And we're going to call it, we have to have a key to identify the timer. That's critical OS load. And again, if you want to go to the definition, there it is in the timer package, and you can read the documentation and see that. It's really easy. Okay, so if it's greater than our critical OS load minutes, and that's the expression we're evaluating, okay, then we're going to do an alert open. And we're going to open an OS load critical alert, and the system will just take care of what that means for you. You can define on your dev, UAT, prod, whatever, and time periods and all, what does a critical alert mean? What does it do? Who does it go to? How often does it repeat? All this kind of stuff. You don't need PagerDuty for this. You don't need Datadog. You don't need any of that. And if it's already open, it doesn't open again. It just sees that it's already open because it's using this key. And then if it's already open and this falls below the threshold, it automatically closes. So you don't have to do that. You could just get rid of that if you wanted to, but we're going to automatically close the alert. This is not the kind of thing that opens a ticket, although you could very easily integrate a critical alert open to open a ticket in your ticketing system, and while this alert would get closed locally and it would stop letting you know about it, your ticket would remain open. So that's very easy to do. With ArcShell, you can integrate, hack it, pretty much do anything. So, and then basically we have the same thing down here for an abnormal, but with abnormal, we're going to have a lower threshold usually. So here 5, and this would be 120 minutes. Now, in a normal corporate enterprise environment, you're usually not running long loads on servers for long periods. You could raise that just above the normal threshold, maybe double whatever would be normal. So let's say you have some batch jobs that run for 2 hours and you're going to press the load about 7. Probably going to want to set that about 8 at 3 or 4 hours on that server. And you can do this again by type of server or individual server. Very easy. It's all maintained here on this one location, and then you deploy out to all of your other nodes. All of the code that describes how you want to do that is here in ArcShell here. I don't mean this file. Okay. So again, we open, in this case, we're going to open a warning, and we're going to call it abnormal OS load, and I'm just going to, actually I should say call that abnormal. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so that is OS load monitoring. Now if I deploy this out to my servers, it's going to work, assuming that I've got messaging set up. In my case, I'm using SendGrid. But if MailX is working, if you got a mail relay set up, that's going to work great. But you can use SendGrid, you can use other systems, and it's really easy to add other ways to send email. If you want to add something from Amazon or Google Cloud, it isn't hard, and then your code doesn't have to change here. The alert open is going to use the messaging system. The messaging system is going to use whatever system you've created to send messages. So I hope what you're seeing here is that ArcShell is by far the most scriptable, capable monitoring, alerting, automation, what have you, tool that I think exists. I've spent a few months working with Ansible, or a couple months working with Ansible. I was actually fairly impressed with it. What's surprising about it is what works, and what doesn't work sometimes doesn't work. But when it works really well and consistently. And somebody that writes a lot of this kind of stuff, I know that's really hard to do. And it's a little bit clunky putting all the pieces together, but once you've spent the time doing it, it's going to work fairly reliably. That is impressive. Also done some automation with AWS Lambdas, and what did I do there? I don't even remember, but in all those cases where I'm working in these other tools, working with Python, working with Ansible, I go, boy, I wish I had access to the command line. I wish I had access to the command line utilities. I wish I could write a library for this product in ArcShell, because I think I could do it better, and I think I could do it faster. And so far, I'm convinced of that. So anyway, this is ArcShell, and this is the latest monitor for monitoring the server load, doing alerting, and we just have a lot of code here. It does a lot. Would love to show you. I wish I had more time, but that's what I got. So anyway, enjoy your weekend, and hopefully I will be posting some more videos soon. Thanks.